Okay, good morning, ladies. And obviously, I'm coming at you in a much different situation than normal. And I just want you to know, even though the teaching team isn't with you this week, we miss you and we are praying for you. And I particularly miss you because there's nothing like teaching to your faces and your eyes. And this is very different. So just know that we we were with you sitting in this room right now. And we're definitely praying over your small group time that it will be a blessing together. I'm going to pray to start us off, and then I'm going to get started with our lesson for the week. Dear God, I just thank you so much for the time that you have given me this week with your word. I thank you for the just awesome things that you've shown me about you, even in the midst of circumstances that popped up that I'm not surprised they popped up because you're teaching me so much through this lesson so specifically. But I just want to say thank you so much that so much of everything that you're teaching us through Ezekiel actually will grow us, and that's the point of revival. And I get to experience it personally, Lord, and I pray that these women get to experience it personally as well. I pray that you will be with my words, Father, that I would be an empty vessel, that you would fill up with your Holy Spirit. And I pray that you would be present in the room with the ladies who are watching today and allow them to feel your spirit and to feel the words that are specifically for them, that you want them to take away. But God, I ask that you would allow us to meditate on your vastness this morning, on your sovereignty and on your glory and on how overwhelmingly undescribable you are. If we leave with that in mind, my job has been done and yours has too, Holy Spirit. So we just welcome you in this place and we ask that you would be with us this morning. In your name, amen. So, Lee Angel has talked a lot about the idea behind our family dynamics and how they really kind of correspond with what Ezekiel's being taught, or what Ezekiel is teaching through God, through Ezekiel to Israel. There's a very, I think the way that we understand it well is when we consider it from a parent-child dynamic. And that's what Lee Angel has talked a lot about. She's mentioned it several times. And it's funny because I agree, but I got a life lesson personally in that this week as I was preparing. And God is funny. He has a wonderful sense of humor when it comes to this kind of a thing. And so as I was preparing my lesson this week, I have these three sweet little kids. And I don't want to be specific about which child I'm going to talk about today, but I do want to say that one of them taught me a lot about Ezekiel, and he didn't realize it. And so one of my children, who is so, so precious, he came into me, and he's in elementary school, and he came into me, and I'm going to use a prop because I need you to fully appreciate what I saw walking into my room. He came into me, and if you can read this, it says, "Thug Life." And I don't know where this shirt came from. I don't know where he got it. I'm assuming it was one of my other children that brought it in as a joke. And so my sweet boy is wearing this shirt that says, "Thug Life." Highly appropriate. And he says, Mom, look at this cool shirt. I'm wearing this to school for career day tomorrow. And of course, I'm saying, no, you're not. Absolutely not. There's no way you're going into school and you're going to show your teachers that you want to be a thug when you grow up. Like, that's not aspirations that I want for you, nor is it who you are. Also, consider that I'm your mom, and these teachers don't know me. They don't spend time with me outside of school. They don't know what kind of person I am or what kind of teaching I do in the home, and they don't know our values and belief systems. The only way they know anything about me or our family is through you, through your attitude and your actions. That's the only way they know me or anything else having to do with our family. And I'm not going to allow you to go in with a thug shirt on. It's just not going to happen. So it's real funny now. At the time, it wasn't that funny, but now I can giggle about it a little bit. So career day comes and goes. I tell him he has to go change. Everything is fine. He goes to school. He does his day. And the next day I go, and I'm going through pickup line, and I go to pick him up. And one of the teachers comes up to my window and says, "Oh, Miss Hardage, Levi's shirt, my littlest, Levi's shirt was so funny." I guess I am going to share his name. But He won't mind. But his shirt was so funny, and that's what's so interesting is it's so out of character for him, which just makes it even more interesting. But she said his shirt was so funny, and I took it back and I said, what shirt are you talking about? And she said, oh, the shirt he wore for career day. And so, yes, immediately I knew this is the shirt that he wore anyway, after I told him no. So I go and I pull up and I pick up and he climbs in the car and I said, what did you wear under your sweatshirt for career day? Because the only thing I saw was a sweatshirt. And he looks at me and I can see recognition in his face that he's busted. And he says, I wore the Thug Life shirt. And now he has consequences. But what he didn't consider, and what a lot of times we don't consider, whether we like it or not, is that his choices directly influence the way the people that he comes into contact with view me as his mother and view his dad. It's the way they see us because they don't know us apart from him. That's the only way they know us is through him, through what they see in him. And that's what we actually are really looking at this week. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about his consequences, it was humbling for me because there's so many times I know I don't represent God the way that I need to, but there's so many people that I'm around and that I interact with in my life that don't know God apart from what I present to them. And that's what we're talking about today in Ezekiel. That's what we've covered all week in Ezekiel, is we're really digging into how Israel, specifically their actions and their attitude, have impacted God's reputation and influenced how the surrounding nations respond to the name of God. Those nations don't know God like Israel does. They don't really know him. Israel knows him. And they're looking at Israel to get an idea of who this God really, really is. And it hasn't been a great representation. Like my son, which they will do, obviously, we all know that, they rebelled. They rebelled. And that's the observation of these nations that we're talking about. That's what they've been watching. So, we've seen now that the consequences for Israel have shown up. So right now we're kind of settling in between two chapters that kind of solidify the consequences that God has been talking about all the way up to this point, and they've happened. So in Ezekiel 24, verse 14, God says through Ezekiel, I, the Lord, have spoken. The time has come for me to act. I will not hold back. I will not have pity, nor will I relent. You will be judged according to your conduct and your actions, declares the sovereign Lord. We're going to hold that sovereign Lord in our mind because we're going to be talking about that a lot today. So the sovereign Lord has said the time has come. The time, it's now. It's happening now. And then we closed out last week in 24, and it was 25 and verse 26. You guys should have read that God tells Ezekiel, and you, son of man, on the day I take away their strongholds, their joy and glory, and the delight of their eyes, and their heart's desire, and their sons and daughters as well, on that day, a fugitive will come and tell you the news. So we've got God saying the time is now, and Ezekiel, you're going to know the time is now because somebody's going to say exactly the day that my judgment comes. So then this is 24 where we ended last week. In 33, which we're going to move forward from next week, in Ezekiel 33:21, Ezekiel gets a message, and it says, in the 12th year of our exile, in the 10th month, on the 5th day, a man who had escaped Jerusalem came to me and said, the city is fallen. So judgment has come. It's done. Israel, everything that God has warned, everything that he has told him, it's happened now. And in between 24 and 33, when Ezekiel gets the message, God specifically calls on Ezekiel to shift his focus from Israel, whose judgment has come, now to the nations surrounding Israel, who are going to be under judgment as well. This week, we've really had a time of considering Israel's, the impact that Israel's disobedience has had on the nations around them. And it's not just disobedience in rebellion. It was disobedience in their pride too. And our author talked a lot about that because their pride really kind of opened the door for all the rebellion to happen. And so the nations around them are seeing this behavior, and they're seeing the way this represents their God. And God has a lot to say about it because it impacts the way these nations have responded to them, to God and to the people. And there's two specific issues that are being addressed this week. And I want us to know, like, what we've done is we've closed out chapter 4, and now we're tucked into chapter 25 and 32. And so what we've done is we've focused on Israel's rebellion and judgment, and then we're going to walk into Israel's redemption, right? That's coming, yay. But tucked in, God has some words for the nations as a whole. And what the two specific issues that are being addressed in these seven specific chapters is that whether they consider it or not, one of the consequences of Israel's disobedience is that it had a direct impact on how these nations around them viewed the name of Yahweh. Their decisions impacted God's reputation and his character, and as a result, it further fueled the malice and the opposition that was already in the hearts of these nations, which we talked about this week. Because those nations already harbored such opposition towards God and hatred and evil thoughts towards God and towards his people, then their response to what happened to Israel was that, yay. It says aha twice in these chapters. Aha, yay. They were so happy and they rejoiced and they were glad that they fell, that they were devastated and full of destruction. And there were even some of the nations that contributed to it. And so they were celebrating. They were celebrating this fall. Ezekiel 25 says, all through the chapter 25, which we read this week, it says that the nations of Ammon, Moab, Edom, Seir, and Philistia all celebrated, those are the aha moments, because of their hatred and malice towards Israel and their jealousy and their resentment towards God. So this is where we get the pride of Israel factoring in. That laid a foundation for them and caused that hatred to stir. Israel's pridefulness made a lasting impact through the whole relationship that they had among these people. It was lasting, and it went through generations, and so there was a long time for that hatred to simmer. And so when they finally rebelled and God judged them for it, that judgment was celebrated tremendously. The nations hated Israel, and they hated God. And now they're boasting in what they see as God's unfaithfulness and believing that the people had lost their inheritance that they had boasted about, that they were so prideful about. They believed that God no longer had a people now, and they were happy about that. I can't imagine. They also mocked Israel as being just like any other nation. They thought they were all this great, set-apart, holy kingdom, but really they're just like any other nation. And when they mock Israel for being any other nation, like any other nation, what they're saying is God is just like any other God. He's not special. There's nothing great about Yahweh. He's just like all these other gods, all these other nations' little g gods. And they believed that means that God is weak and full of empty promises. This, because they don't know God the way that Israel knows God, because of Israel's attitudes and actions, and because they already were harboring resentment and hatred in their heart towards Israel, they're rejoicing over God not having a people and being proved weak in their minds. That's why they're getting judged by Yahweh. Then we bring in Tyre and Egypt, and they're also rejoicing in Israel's destruction because they believed that would be an opportunity for them to show their own power, for them to be greedy and step in with what they considered to be their power and their privilege. And they believed it would give them access to take what they wanted from God's land, from that special land, and destroy what was left with the city and pillage it. They were greedy. But in their eyes, too, God was weak. He was weak. Their power was way greater than God's. As a matter of fact, they were reaping the benefits of what God couldn't protect in their minds. And that's why God is coming against them. In chapter 28, we're even told that the king of Tyre saw himself as a god himself on a throne, greedy for power and position, in direct opposition to Israel's God. These nations witnessed Israel's destruction and rebellion, and in their eyes, the name of the God that they claimed, the name that was supposed to set him apart from everybody else, meant nothing. It's just like any other God. But God is not okay with that, and he's not going to put up with that, and it is not going to stand, because God is going to deal harshly, as we will see, with these nations even more harshly than with Israel. They're not going to come back from his judgment. He's not going to let his name be mocked, minimized, or treated with disrespect. He's the king of the universe, and he's the creator of the world. In Psalms 22, 27 through 28, it says, all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over all nations. God will always, always protect and restore his name. He will avenge his name, and he will avenge the people who carry his name, because he is both Israel's judge and defender, and he is true to his word. He is their protector and their chastiser, and he is true to his promises to them. And they represent his name, and because of his promises to them, he will avenge them. But way, way more importantly, he will avenge himself. He'll stay true to his promises. And every nation is going to know exactly who God is. And that's our main point for this week. That's where we really need to wrestle and sit and absorb what the whole point is, not just of these chapters, which it is very much of these chapters, but it is actually the main point of the whole book of Ezekiel. And truly, everything that God does beyond Ezekiel, before Ezekiel, until the end of time when Jesus comes back. And this is the main point that he makes over and over and over again. And this is the first blank on your handout, and this is the only point I'm going to drive home today, is that they will know that I am Yahweh, the Lord. They will know that I am Yahweh, the Lord. Every accusation and charge that he makes, every judgment, and as we will see, every step of redemption is intended to make it clear to the whole world, not just Israel, yes, Israel, but to all of the nations, that God is exactly who he says he is. He is the one true God. Kenneth Hannah wrote a book called Exploring the Old Testament, and he writes this: God had regard for his holy name. He had regard for his holy name, and he wanted it to be acknowledged and revered by man as well. The proclamation and acceptance of this holy name was God's ultimate goal, that Israel and all the nations would acknowledge God as the sovereign Lord is the central theme and purpose of the book of Ezekiel, that Israel and all nations would acknowledge God as the sovereign Lord is the theme and the purpose of the book of Ezekiel, and I would argue the book of his whole word, the whole Bible, all of it. And it's even the purpose of our whole existence. As God speaks through Ezekiel, he does it with this specific pattern in mind, that he will state his name. It will be clear that they know that he is stating his name, that he's saying who he is, but then also that everything that he does is for the purpose of making sure they are clear, that they know that this is who he is. That's the pattern that we see all through Ezekiel. We've seen it before, and we've seen it a lot over the chapters this week. And so what he does is first, and this is in your handout as well, is first we know he establishes his authority and power by declaring his name when he makes a statement through Ezekiel. So when Ezekiel says, he'll make a statement and he'll say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. This is what the sovereign Lord says. That's your blanks. It is not by accident that he's using the phrase sovereign Lord. God instructs Ezekiel to use that for a reason. It is making clear that this is the person who's speaking. This is who's speaking. It's not Ezekiel. It's not Ezekiel's opinions. It's not the word on the street that Ezekiel's sharing with everybody. It is Yahweh Adonai who is speaking. This shows that God is not just the master of Israel, but of the whole entire world. And this God, this sovereign Lord, is the one who's witnessed the behaviors of the nations. He's seen it through all time. He knows the heart level motivations behind the behaviors of the nations. And he is the one who's going to judge them. It is him who they are dealing with. They have to reconcile with Adonai, Yahweh. He's the one who sees. And then, after he tells them this is who's speaking, he shows them how he's going to vindicate his name using his power and authority. And this is the next blanks in your handout. And he tells the people the results of his judgments, everything that he says he's going to do, the reason why he's doing that, the intended outcome of those judgments will be that then they will know that I'm the Lord. So he is not leaving any doubts for anyone from Israel to the nations around Israel, for us as we're reading it, who it is that's speaking, and that everything he does, everything he says, the motivation of his own heart is so that we are clear on that. We are clear that this is the name of the one who is reconciling everyone to him and judging those who have opposed his name and opposed his people. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Ultimately, it's all about him. His right to be honored and obeyed. It is all designed, everything is designed to reinforce his glory and his holiness as God. And Ezekiel's going to say this again in kind of a hinge verse in 39:7 when we get to it, but I'm going to read it for you right now. It's when God says through Ezekiel, I will make known my holy name among the people of Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned. And the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One in Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned. Everything he's doing is to prove that he is God. And ultimately, people will know him either through judgment or through redemption, restoration, and revival. Everyone will know him. So I think it's only fitting this morning that before we go any further, we make sure that we know exactly who it is that we're talking about, that we don't skim over that name, that we don't minimize the name in our reading and our thoughts, but that we sit for a moment in this name of who it is that we serve, but who it is that we're reading about and the story and the point of everything that we're doing in this study. So, let's look first at the name Yahweh. And I know some of you have done name studies, and they're really awesome. But this is the name that God specifically chose for himself. This is the one he refers to himself as the majority of the time. It's the name that he chose personally to give to his people, to Israel, so that they will know him. Because all the gods were called Elohim. And so what we're reading when we read before where God gives his name to Israel is God is referred to as Elohim. It's just the name for God. It just means God, and it can mean any God. It can mean pagan gods. It's used to describe pagan gods. There were lots of Elohims in the world. But God gave Israel the name Yahweh, specifically to them so that they could have relationship with him and know him specifically with his name that was set apart just for them, so that they know he is the one true God, set apart from all other gods. The word Yahweh means he who is, he who will be, and he who causes all that is. He's all of these things combined together in one. He is often referred to as the one who was, who is, and who will be, who always will be. And this basically means, and we can't wrap our minds around this, that he is existence itself. That's what Yahweh means. I am existence. I am. The name Yahweh indicates that God exists beyond time and space and matter because he is existence itself. He's not bound by any of the things that he makes to exist out of his existence. He's beyond all that. He's bigger. Adonai, the next name that's used constantly to establish his authority and sovereignty, literally means my Lord, as in my master or my ruler or master of the universe, of the earth. It means that it's the authority over all and all submit to him. It carries with it the expectation that no one will question the name Adonai, that no one will question obedience like Kim talked about last week of Adonai. He is the master. He is the one that is expected to rule and expects submission. When Adonai and Yahweh are combined, as God does constantly, as we've said through Ezekiel, when he calls himself sovereign Lord, that's Adonai Yahweh, it is strongly reinforcing God's matchlessness as the Lord and Master who always was, always is, and always will be, who has brought about all that is in existence because he is existence. God's name is not just a label. It holds within it his reputation and his character and his attributes, including the implication of his authority, as we said, over everything. And it is not ever, nor will it ever be for us, fully comprehensible or understandable. That's how big it is. We can never grasp the fullness of it. In the book of Job, of course, as I was thinking about and praying through the sovereignty of God, immediately the book of Job came to mind because God is speaking in his own words to establish his sovereign lordship, right? This is his own words describing who he is and who we are. And he's making it very clear to put us in our appropriate places in the book of Job. And it immediately came to mind. And I want us to read it together, that what he says about himself and about us. And this should make it very clear who gets the worship and the authority and the power and who is the submitter and the obedient ones. Job writes, Job says, "Then the Lord, Yahweh, answered Job from the whirlwind. Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" That really should just put us in, we don't need to read anymore. We know now where we stand. That's it. Like, we're done. It says, "Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundations? And who laid its cornerstone as the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who kept the sea inside its boundaries as it burst from the womb and as I clothed it with clouds and wrapped it in thick darkness? For I locked it behind barred gates, limiting its shores, and I said, 'This far and no farther will you come. Here your proud waves must stop.' Have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? Can you direct the movement of the stars, binding the cluster of the Pleiades or loosening the cords of Orion? Can you direct the constellations through the seasons or guide the bear with her cubs across the heavens? Do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? Can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? Who gives intuition to the heart and instinct to the mind?" And there is one name alone that answers that question, and it is not in this room, and it is not in Ezekiel's room, and it is not in Israel's nation. It is Yahweh. It's Yahweh. To me, this picture is such an incredible visual representation for me personally of what God is describing in the book of Job. And as once again, God was just bringing these really neat things to mind that have stuck with me over time, because one thing that I have struggled with is a why question a lot, and I don't think that I'm the only one. And so when that why question comes up, or when something comes up that I don't understand, or even when I read in his word things that I don't understand, the why behind it, a lot of times I'll think about this specific picture. And this was taken by the Hubble telescope a few years ago, and some of you may have seen this before. But the really cool thing is that in this square, over on the side, you can see the square is around a red dot. And that bottom picture is a zoom in of that red dot. So it's really blurry, but it's a zoom in of that red dot. that the Hubble telescope took a picture of. And what you're looking at is a bunch of galaxies. So these aren't just stars, these are all galaxies, different galaxies. And the Hubble telescope is essentially looking back in time. And so this blurry picture here is 13.2 billion years back in time. We're looking through the lens of a telescope into history, back in time, which is really cool in itself. But what's amazing is that God made this. This is the earliest and furthest galaxy known to man. They mapped this as close to it's within a few years of the let there be light moment of creation, which is mind-boggling. So God said, let there be light, and it projected into the world. And here we have this representation, this evidence, this proof. This proof. God made this, and he made every one of these galaxies, and he put them into motion, and he put them into being. Who establishes the law of the universe? It is not us. It is God. It is God. And what I love about this is it's so mind-blowing to think that we're looking back in time, but what's even more incredible is not even just that he made this, that this is his work, that he did this, but that he was there, and he is here, and he is with Ezekiel, and he has no limitations of time or space or matter or boundaries. He is everywhere. He is all places at once. So he sees this, and at the same time, he knows the day Jesus is coming back, and he sees it all. He sees it all. He can create this galaxy, and he can also know specifically what your heart needs in this room right now, all at once, without limitation. And that is a sovereign God. That is Yahweh. C.S. Lewis writes in his book, Mere Christianity, if you picture time as a straight line along which we have to travel, then you must picture God as the whole page on which the line is drawn. We come to the parts one by one. We have to leave A behind before we get to B, and we can't reach C until we leave B behind. We have to experience experiences as we come to them, and we can't see what's coming ahead. But God, from above or outside or all around, he contains the whole line, and he sees it all. He sees it all. And that, my friend, that is authority, and that is sovereignty. And the result should be that we feel small. That is the result. We should feel small and dependent and eager to obey. Just like Kim spoke about last week. That's what we do, because he does that. And this is what happens when we know that he is the sovereign Lord. He is the point. He's the point. And God spoke that first galaxy into existence. That is the same God who is speaking to the nations through Ezekiel. And of course, he is going to avenge his name. He is Yahweh. He is the creator of the universe. He will avenge his name. He's not going to allow it to be minimized or mocked or profaned. So, the Lord will prove he is who he says he is first through the judgment of the nations. And I don't want us to miss one more time the point of sovereignty, even in the details that are written on our pages. He is Lord, even in between the lines, in the details, because he has a plan for all of this from beginning to end. And what's so cool is that he shows us that even not just by issuing judgment, not even by just knowing their hearts when they sin against him, not even just by knowing the hearts of the nations when they sin against him and judging and making judgments. It's in even the tools that he uses to judge. There is his sovereignty. There is his power and authority. And it's not chosen by accident, because God is God. In 25:3, God tells the nation of Ammon, which we've read this week, I'm going to give you to the people of the east, okay, of the east. And then in 25:10, he tells the nation of Moab, I will give Moab along with the Ammonites to the people of the east. We hear the east a lot, And that, of course, is referring to Babylon, the nation of Babylon. He is using Babylon as his tool for judgment to bring down these nations that are opposing him. And he also promises that Babylon is going to attack Tyre and Egypt, and he will start their ultimate destruction with Babylon. Babylon is not an accidental use here. And so if we go back in time one more time, not as far as the first galaxy of creation, but fairly close, and go back to Genesis 10, what happens in Genesis 10, and remember, we're speaking about the nations here specifically in our chapters this week. And so if we go back to Genesis 10, what's really cool is in Genesis 10, there's a list of a genealogy. And we're not going to obviously read them and all the names, but just know you can go look on your own time if you want. But there's a list of a genealogy, and those are the descendants of Noah. And what Bible scholars actually call this list of this genealogy is they call it the Table of Nations. Because these are the families of Noah from the origins of the flood where he started from. And what happens is as Noah's families and descendants start multiplying, they start creating the nations. And so this list of genealogy is actually the origin of the nations of the ancient Near East that we're reading about today. This is where they began. This was their starting point. In Genesis 9:7, God had told Noah and his sons to be fruitful and to multiply and to increase abundantly on the earth and multiply upon it. And that's what they're doing. They're multiplying and they're growing, and all these nations are forming, and they're all coming about. And that's an act of obedience in multiplication. So we're doing okay until chapter 11. So our nations are forming, our nations are shaping, and some of these nations, we can read their names in this list. But once again, we hit chapter 11. And instead of staying obedient to the sovereign Lord's command, humanity decides to do what they want to do. And I know that's way out of character for mankind. That's really shocking for them to just do what they want instead. And that's basically what we have here in Genesis. And it mimics the rebellion that we see in Genesis chapter 3, and that we will see in Ezekiel. It says, now the whole world in Genesis 11:1 had one language and a common speech. And as people moved eastward, that eastward, okay, the people of the east, they found a plain in Shinar and they settled there. And they said to each other, come, let's make bricks and let's bake them thoroughly. And they used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. And then they said, listen to this, come. Let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. They want to make a name for themselves. A name. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other. And so the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. And that's why it's called Babel or Babylon. It's the same word. Because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world and scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Babel and Babylon are the same, and it is the Hebrew word for confusion. This is a very significant moment in time. So after God flooded the entire earth, he found mercy on humanity, and he commanded them to replenish the earth and multiply. But instead, and spread over the lands, but instead they gathered together and they decided to remain in a single area, and they attempted to establish what was essentially a temple for themselves, to create a name for them. Not God, for them. It was a way for them to be their own God. This was the first place and the first experience of organized corporate opposition against God. Dr. Michael Heiser, he's an incredible Old Testament scholar, and he says it this way. The events at Babel or Babylon is central to understanding how nations came to worship other gods besides Yahweh who created them. This was the moment that began pagan god worship. besides Yahweh who had created them. This is where Yahweh shifts from focusing on all the people of the earth to electing Israel. In a sense, the Babel event marks Yahweh disowning the nations of the world as his human family in favor of electing Israel, whom he also will use to reclaim the nations as his people. So left to their own devices, these nations who could no longer communicate and scheme as a large body then developed pagan gods for worship according to their own languages and cultures. They had already decided that they wanted a name for themselves, just for themselves. Isn't it interesting that our sovereign Lord, who knows all of time, who is not bound by any of those things, is using the place where the first corporate opposition to the name of Yahweh began with a desire to make their own name as a tool for judgment against these nations who have continued to collectively oppose the name of Yahweh ever since then. They began with Babylon and they will end with Babylon. And that's what the sovereign Lord says. And then they will know that he is the Lord. But we also can't forget that Babylon's time is coming. And God will continue to avenge his great name by restoring Israel back to himself. And of course, we're going to get into all that detail over these next couple weeks, and I am so ready and excited for the restoration piece of the story. But God will use his redemption of Israel once again to prove his name and make it known that he is the sovereign Lord and he is who he has always said he is. In Ezekiel 28, tucked in to Ezekiel 28, there's verse 25 and 26. And God says through Ezekiel, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I gather the house of Israel from the people where they're dispersed, I will reveal my sovereign power over them inside of the nations. And they will live in their land that I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will live securely in it. They will build houses, and they will plant vineyards. They'll live securely when I execute my judgments on all those who scorn them and surround them, and then they will know that I am the Lord their God. He will continue to prove his name through Israel, to Israel, but also to all the nations. And we get to be one of those that benefit from that. God cares about his holy name. And everything he does, everything that he's always done from the beginning of time to the end of time is meant to reveal himself to the world. But that's going to be through judgment if we're not careful, but also through redemption. Both. We can get both. We can use both to know him. I want to choose redemption. And believe me, he will correct anyone who doesn't represent it well or represent it in vain, as he says in his command on Mount Sinai. He's not going to tolerate anybody who's going to rejoice in the harm or the downfall of his people who carry his name. And he's also not going to allow the rejoicing or the mocking or the profaning of his holy name itself. So as we sit this morning, of course, we need to have some reflection, a challenge of reflection. We've done it every week, all through the study. And this morning we have to do the same thing, because this stuff, this is the things. These are the things that matter that we've been talking about. And this is the one. This is the one. Let's remind us, how does this message in Ezekiel directly apply to us today? And so we have to, of course, flip over to the New Covenant section. We're going to go a little forward in time from Ezekiel now and read John 17, 24 through 26. And here Jesus is praying in the garden before he's going to complete the plan for redemption that God has issued and that he's working towards in Ezekiel. He's going to complete this plan, and before he does, he's praying in the garden, and he says, "Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, so that they can see my glory that you gave me, because you loved me before the creation of the world." Once again, the whole timeline is God's. "Righteous Father, even if the world does not know you, I know you. And these men know that you've sent me. I have made known your name to them. I, Jesus, have made your name known, and I will continue to make it known, so that the love you've loved me with may be in them, and I may be in them. Then you will know that I am the Lord, through Jesus. He's it. He is the last, final, redemptive piece, and through him, all of us know the name of the Lord. All of us. And that's why in Matthew 28, 18 through 19, we read that Jesus came up and said to the disciples, all authority, everything we've been talking about, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, and you baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. In the name. The name of Yahweh was made known to us through Jesus, so now we who call ourselves Christians are carrying his name. We're the representatives. So anybody that doesn't know God the way we know God, who hasn't spent time with him the way we spend time with him, they look to us and our attitudes and our actions to know him and to determine their view of who he is. We get to carry that name through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we've seen in Ezekiel this week, there is tremendous power in corporate representation. We're a body of believers. And how we as an individual, which we've said a lot, matters. How we collectively behave and interact really, really matters too. How we respond to circumstances and how we engage with each other and with others outside of our collective corporate gatherings. Those things are going to directly influence how other people see God. And people are watching. They are watching and they are waiting, just like the nations around Israel were. They're watching us. They're watching Christians who carry the name of Yahweh. So if we come across people who are watching us and they're questioning or they're uncertain about God, then the actions and the words of collective Christianity can either draw them in or we can push them away. If people have already decided that they have coldness and malice in their heart and they don't like God and they don't believe and they can't stand God, if they've already decided that, guess what? Our actions and words as collective Christianity can prove them wrong in their own minds, or we can make them doubt that they were right about him. They can make them question, was I wrong about this God? Look at these people. Look at how they love each other and care for each other and how they worship. It matters how we represent the name of God and of Jesus Christ. And it's important to ask ourselves as we reflect, which I pray that we keep doing as we go through this study. I have some questions on the back of the handout that are just broad questions for us to periodically look at and reflect on. And the first one is, how well do we actually know Yahweh ourselves? How well do we really know the sovereign Lord? Are we holding him with the appropriate place of awe and respect and continually seeking to know him more deeply? That's why I wanted us to sit in it for a while this morning. We need to do this regularly. We need to be in awe of the bigness of God as much as possible to remind us who it is that we bear their name, whose name it is that we carry with us and represent to the world. How much do we trust the sovereign Lord really? If we're truly honest with ourselves, how much do we trust the Lord? When things don't happen in our way, or when things aren't fair, or when things don't make sense, do we make God small and demand our way or try to take control? Or do we sit back and accept God isn't bound by anything that exists because he is existence itself, and he knows what he's doing? He knows what he's doing. When we can't trust 100% that we know what's going on, when things are confusing, or when we don't like what we see, we can trust God. Whose name are we making great in our lives? Whose name is being lifted up in our actions? Whose name is being lifted in our minds and in our hearts and in our attitudes? And then finally, how are we treating others who don't know God yet? That's the big one. Disobedience was the sin that led to judgment by Israel, but the hatred that brewed in the hearts of those nations around them came from Israel's pride and behavior about their faith. They believed that they were very special because they were the chosen nation, and they were. But what should have led from that, they should have led out with humility. Does the label of Christian make us turn our nose at other people? Or do we have a tendency to have a holier-than-thou attitude? Watch collective Christianity and their responses to the external world and to people who are lost. What we have to remind ourselves consistently is that the playing field is equal at the foot of the cross, and the last will be first in the kingdom of heaven, and the least will be the greatest. And there is Jesus, and then there's everybody else. And I think if more people carrying the name of Christ as a banner would consider some of these questions and just reflect periodically, then maybe as we see individual revival in our hearts, maybe that would influence the collective as a whole. And that's my prayer for our revival of our nation, as Kim directed us to pray for this week. It has to start with the one, but the more the ones do this, the more we reflect on how we're carrying the banner of Christ and of Yahweh, the more the shift will happen as a whole, and our representation as a collective body will change. And finally, I cannot finish without saying that I know for a fact, and we all know for a fact, that there are Christians in the world who are suffering persecution at the hands of those who hate God and hate us. They are all over the place being opposed and killed and harmed and forced to hide because there are people around them that hate the God that they serve. And there may even be people in your own lives that mock your faith and refuse to respect God regardless of what you say or do. It doesn't matter how you act. They hate God anyway. And I just want us to remember what God has said repeatedly in Ezekiel, and our main point today is they will know. They will know that he is Lord. They will know. Paul says in Philippians 2:10 that at the name of Jesus, every single knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father. He's the Father and the God of all nations. But as for us, I pray that we lift his holy name with honor and with praise and with humility as we are moving forward. Let me pray. God, I just want to say thank you and worship you for just a minute and praise you because of how overwhelming you are. God, I'm so glad you are big. And sometimes I admit that I struggle with understanding a lot of the whys, and that's where a doubt and a desire to control can come in. But God, I don't want to serve a God I can explain. I don't want that. I need you to be bigger than that. I need you to be bigger than things that I can control myself. And so, God, I ask that as we go forward into small group time and as we go into our time outside of this place and continue our lives, that we would not forget, and that even when we see nature around us and we look in the faces of children or of a rose or a flower, or watch the rain fall or look at the stars in the sky, that we would be reminded that you are Yahweh. You are Adonai Yahweh. You are the sovereign Lord. And that will make us long to obey you, to serve you, that it will put us in a place of humility, and that we will trust you. I pray this over these women, and I pray for their time together in small group, that it will be a blessing to your heart, Lord, as they talk together. In Jesus' name, amen.